Chosen one. This is not theatrics. This is spiritual urgency dressed as digital chaos. You're seeing this now because the curtain is finally lifted, and what's been hiding behind it is darker, older, and closer than you ever imagined. Someone who knows a few expert liars once said, "Some people lie so confidently, you'd think they took an oath under Satan instead of God." That was no metaphor. The person who broke you, wounded you, and tried to erase your light. They didn't just hurt you randomly. They were sent. Their lies weren't emotional accidents. They were weaponized narratives. They called you unstable, dangerous, manipulative. But it was all projection, reverse alchemy, designed to bury your true calling under shame and doubt. Yet here you are, still glowing, still growing, still chosen. And now the illusion is falling apart. People are starting to question, eyes are opening. The math isn't mathing anymore, because you were never the problem. You were the prophecy. Behind closed doors, a storm is raging. And guess what? You're the one who triggered it. Not by shouting, not by exposing, just by surviving. Elon Musk says it's an emergency. He's just the messenger. The real alarm is cosmic, because the one who hurt you is about to be revealed. Not by your hand, but by their own collapse. So open your eyes, open your spirit, and get ready to receive what was stolen. This isn't revenge, it's divine restoration, and it starts now. Fact: when someone lies, they mostly focus on preventing others from seeing the real evidence, according to behavioral psychology. Even if no one speaks, the truth eventually emerges, because the human brain is programmed to see patterns. The murmurs have begun now. They're asking more and more inquiries. What about the liar? They seem to have been subpoenaed by karma itself, as seen by the perspiration seeping through their clothing. Because everyone is now aware that the person they were warning about was the one who was really issuing the caution. Stay there, because we're going to break out precisely why they're freaking out, how you completely changed the course of events without anybody seeing, and why the truth is now pulling their falsehoods along like a soiled front. Let's investigate further. Because your presence revealed their whole identity as fake. They told lies about you. They understood deep down that you were everything they feigned to be, which is why they lied about you. That's the true cause of their worry. You were a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. Therefore, you weren't simply another person in the room. You arrived with genuine strength, integrity, and a soul that their ego could not control or shape. They were frightened because their masks began to come off the more people saw the real you, and it was beyond their means. So they did what cowards do. They launched their confident, loudest, and a first assault. Not because it was true, but rather because they wanted to say it before you had a chance to respond. They informed everyone who would listen that you were damaged, poisonous, jealous, and false. Before the facts had a chance to settle in, they had to turn the story around. They lied so brazenly for that reason. It was survival, not merely malice. Convincing others that they were the nice, the powerful, and the misunderstood person was the foundation of their whole identity. However, their house of cards began to tremble when you entered the same room and unconsciously exhibited those qualities. They launched a smear campaign as a result. Because you had emotions, they portrayed you as unstable. Because you had standards, they referred to you as phony. They said that since you had limits, you were conceited. They didn't even give a damn whether the tale made sense, which is crazy. All they needed was for it to adhere. They just needed enough people to believe it long enough to keep the truth hidden, isolate you, and silence you. They didn't need everyone to believe it forever. However, what they dreaded most is already taking place. Everything is becoming clearer with time. People are becoming aware of their performance flaws. People are terrified because the truth doesn't have to shout. And those who formerly thought the worst of you are now beginning to question, wait, if they were lying about this, what else were they lying about? It only requires time, and your time has come. Type Amen to embrace the angel's blessings. Show your support by giving super thanks up to $20. They weaponized projection because they knew the truth would never work against you. They couldn't use the truth against you, so they utilized their own dirt and tossed it on your name instead. That is projection's perverse brilliance. They placed all of the worst aspects of themselves, the deception, the treachery, the manipulation, on you as if it were your first transgression. Even worse is how convincing they were. They weren't only lying, they were speaking the truth, although in the wrong way. When it was them who were being dishonest, they accused you of being disloyal. While they were attempting to tug every thread behind the scenes, they labeled you domineering. While they were wailing for approval in every room they went into, they called you attention-seeking. It wasn't arbitrary. There was no miscommunication. It was planned. Type Amen to embrace the angel's blessings. Show your support by giving super thanks up to $20. They used it as a weapon because they knew you weren't the kind of person who would bow to them. They wager on your inaction. They were able to manipulate the story to suit their interests since they assumed you would leave rather than defend yourself. You just had discernment. You weren't hard. You were sick of being exploited, not chilled. However, your strength seemed to be a danger to them. Thus, while wearing a halo, they dragged your name into the ground. A person like that is most dangerous because they are skilled at getting other people feel sorry for them. They conveniently omit every chapter in which they are the issue while selling the narrative of how difficult it was to work with you. You are now resentful if you do speak out. You're attempting to create drama now. However, the truth always manages to come to the fore. People are now beginning to make the connections. They're seeing that the way you seem in real life doesn't align with what was stated about you, because projection is only effective for so long until reality catches up. The liar is panicked. They are also aware that the rug will soon disappear. They didn't think you would recover. They wanted you to respond, not to think. They didn't think you would recover. They had no intention of doing it. They were counting on your suffering becoming a public outburst. They didn't just lie about you. They were waiting for you to become the lie. They wanted you to blow up, to act out, to give them something to point at and say, "See, I told you they were crazy." They acted innocent in public and pushed your buttons in private because of this. They wanted an emotional response from you, not an introspective one. However, you chose to remain silent and heal, the riskiest thing someone in your situation could do, instead of losing oneself. More than anything else, that quiet frightened them, as it indicated that you were observing. It indicated that you were taking a step back, examining trends, making connections, and gaining knowledge. Instead of yelling your version of events, you were researching theirs, and you become wiser as a result of that healing, not simply stronger. They didn't think you would recover. They wanted you to respond, not to think. They didn't think you would recover. They had no intention of doing it. They were counting on your suffering becoming a public outburst. They didn't just lie about you. They were waiting for you to become the lie. They wanted you to blow up, to act out, to give them something to point at and say, "See, I told you they were crazy." They acted innocent in public and pushed your buttons in private because of this. They wanted an emotional response from you, not an introspective one. However, you chose to remain silent and heal, the riskiest thing someone in your situation could do, instead of losing oneself. More than anything else, that quiet frightened them as it indicated that you were observing. It indicated that you were taking a step back, examining trends, making connections, and gaining knowledge. Instead of yelling your version of events, you were researching theirs. And you become wiser as a result of that healing, not simply stronger. Cycles, phony apologies, and manipulative techniques were apparent to you. You saw their actions while they believed no one was looking. Their falsehoods began to crumble with each step you took toward recovery. They didn't realize how resilient you were. They believed that if you broke your heart, you would also break your spirit. However, you did more than just recover. You rebuilt stronger, wiser, and more resilient. You found your serenity. You didn't go insane. Someone who has gone through hell and emerged with clarity is the biggest danger to a liar. Now that you're steady, they're freaking out. Not because you're noisy. You aren't venting on the internet. Closure is not what you're seeking. You don't even harbor resentment. You've risen, and your tranquility is upsetting them, as it indicates that their story didn't succeed. It indicates that there is no such thing as the version of you they attempted to market. People begin to doubt what they say the longer you remain silent. You had to be broken for them. However, you transformed your breakdown into wisdom. And now that you've recovered, you're a mirror instead of a target. And that reflection is destroying their facade. Because your character has survived their falsehoods, they are in a panic. They're freaking out because their falsehoods didn't force your character to crumble. It was unharmed, towering, and stable. They believed that time would show they were correct when they circulated the allegations that you were unstable. They anticipated that you would lose control, unravel, and somehow live up to the story they told others behind your back. 5 years later, however, you're still standing, more stable, more rooted, and more content than before. You not only made it through their slander campaign, but you flourished despite it. Your connections were intact, the appropriate individuals remained, and you developed closer relationships with those who could see you for who you really are. Additionally, your work did not collapse. You maintained your concentration, worked quietly, and continued to construct. You had self-awareness as your foundation, and whispers cannot destroy that kind of foundation. You weren't looking for approval. In actuality, they misjudged your foundation. They thought you were acting out of ego or emotion, but you were acting out of patience, principle, and purpose. You exposed them over time, not with words, which is why the terror has now begun to spread. People began to watch. The discrepancy between what they saw in you and what they were taught about you is too great to overlook. They noticed that you didn't lose it, spiral, or lash out. You didn't strike back. While the liar became more erratic, frantic, and contradictory with their own tale, you were steady, compassionate, and composed. What's really bothering them is that individuals are making connections on their own. Quiet observation was sufficient. No drama or conflict was required. The focus is now changing, and those who portrayed you as unstable are now seen as untrustworthy themselves. Your constancy has caused their story to fall apart. They put all their money on your failure, but they didn't take your stamina into consideration. All they can do now is watch as the reality that frightened them comes to light in a natural and public way. You didn't need to defend your morals. You just had to be yourself, and that's what they didn't anticipate. They planted a lie, but they neglected to mention that people feed their own curiosity. They believed they were smart. They believed they could influence how everyone perceived you if they reached people first, and sowed the tale early with sufficient emotion and detail. Before you had a chance to speak, they wanted to control the story and determine how other people would see you. It worked for a time. Some listened, while others remained unconvinced. However, they failed to account for human curiosity, which was beyond their control. Words are not always taken at face value. People eventually stop repeating what they have been told and begin to focus on what they observe. Their strategy began to go apart at that point. They undervalued the silent watchers in the background, the people who never said, but were always aware of everything. They saw your demeanor, your refusal to take offense, your continued motion, and the way your activities remained consistent, even while your name was being brought up. They saw that the person portraying the issue somehow has more elegance, consistency, and integrity than the individual speaking all the time. Panic struck at that point, not when you fought back, Not when you stated your side, but when people began watching instead of listening. When people realized for themselves the discrepancy between who you are and what was claimed about you, the eyes started to replace the ears. In that change, the falsehood began to fester. People may have heard the tale, but now they're comparing it to reality, and it doesn't fit. They're noting the paradoxes, the inconsistencies, the drama that still surrounds the storyteller even after you're long gone. In hushed talks, side looks, and rising misgivings, the truth is starting to spread without you having to utter a word. They established a fake story like it was truth, but they overlooked one thing. People water their own curiosity, and as that inquiry turns into clarity, no untruth stands a chance. Your development is silently causing people to reevaluate all they heard. Your development didn't come with big announcements or theatrical speeches. It took place in secret, in solitude, and while no one else was there. However, the outcomes are now indisputable. You enter spaces with an unfake sense of calm, a presence that is more powerful than any denial. You're not just getting by, you're shining, thinking clearly, moving gracefully, and projecting an air of self-awareness. The falsehoods spread about you become worse with each step you go ahead. Those who used to believe the rumors are starting to doubt them. Your development has made it hard to disregard the truth, not because you sat them down and gave them an explanation. Your generosity is inconsistent with the story. They said you were ignorant, yet your knowledge surpasses that. The storyteller's turmoil is revealed by your composure. They experience that internal tension whenever they see you today, laughing, developing, and triumphing without resentment. This is the power of change done right. How could this possibly be the same person I was warned about? Even those who formerly thought the worst are forced to think silently. You didn't defend your reputation. You made yourself indisputable and repaired it. You turned into the antithesis of who they thought you were. Their comments fall hollow the higher you ascend. The liar, who assumed that your quiet indicated weakness, is dwindling in the meanwhile. It's because the attention is shifting, not because you've done anything to them specifically. To your gradual progress, they seem exposed, bitter, and stuck. Now that people are aware of the difference, it is too obvious to ignore. Your defense is development. It's your truth, and without you saying a word, it's changing the whole narrative. You buried the falsehood with your development rather than just outliving it. They didn't assume you would have receipts. They assumed you would remain mute and shattered. They assumed you would remain in survival mode, mute, dispersed, and too distraught to comprehend what had transpired. They were relying on the fact that you would be too damaged to ever collect evidence, much less yourself. Assuming they would never be found, they hurled charges with reckless abandon, like stones in a mob. They thought that forgetting would be necessary for your rehabilitation, took your astonishment for acquiescence, and relied on your quiet. However, they were entirely mistaken. Because you were purposefully and discreetly fitting the pieces together, while they carried on as if nothing had occurred. You saw the patterns, saved the messages, recalled the dates, and made the connections. Not out of resentment, but rather for clarity, while they were out there pretending to be the victim, to prevent gaslighting from succeeding, not to assault. You remembered and you healed. Your presence now serves as evidence that they cannot remove. You returned entire. You didn't return loud. Just being complete is dangerous because it implies you have your power, your voice, and your receipts. Spiritual, emotional, and energetic ones in addition to the bodily ones. You are aware of what occurred. You know how, when, and who did what. They didn't realize you lived through your timelines. They wanted you to be too shattered to ever speak, much less live out loud. But you have truths. The fact that you aren't even involved in a smear campaign is what really shocks people. Now you're just experiencing life to the fullest. Every falsehood they said is contradicted by your own being, your pleasure, and your might. Your completeness reveals the discrepancy between their words and your reality, not that you're purposefully exposing them. The issue was never you, and it's proven by your receipts, your memory, your steadiness, and your survival. They never imagined you would go this far. They believed that your suffering had buried the evidence. However, they overlooked the fact that the truth never goes away. It just waits for the appropriate time to get to its feet. And now is that time. Making you the villain they really were was the foundation of their whole persona. They created a whole identity based on lying about you. Painting you as the bad guy was the foundation of their success, credibility, and even the compassion they garnered. They didn't need information. All they needed was the proper audience, enough drama, and enough emotion to make a compelling sob tale. You were seen as the one who was unstable, unfaithful, and the source of mayhem. They were getting praise for surviving you while you were attempting to understand the betrayal. They exploited you as a scapegoat to absolve themselves, to enter areas they didn't deserve. They put your name under the bus. It worked for a time because you weren't there to advocate for yourself. They thrived in spaces that you were not allowed to enter. In circles where your voice was muted, they earned trust. While the real you was recovering in the shadows, they feasted on a phony victim image.